This presentation highlights anxiety in children, but more specifically focuses on somatic symptoms and what teachers can do to have more awareness about anxiety their students may be experiencing and how best to support them in the classroom. We know that about 7% of school-age children have an anxiety diagnosis, so building competence in this area is definitely important. We hope to show you what anxiety can look like and also give you some tools to help you and your students be more successful. This presentation was put together by myself, Laura Eric, and Lori Powell. I am the Youth First social worker at two different schools. I work at Evansville Day School, which is a private school that serves students kindergarten through 12th grade, and Signature School, which is a public charter high school in Evansville that serves students from 9th through 12th grade. Lori Powell is the Youth First social worker at Vogel Elementary, and she works with students in kindergarten through 6th grades. Before we get into the symptoms of what anxiety may look like for your students, it's important to think about a couple ideas. Transitions in general can always be a difficult thing for children with anxiety to manage. That change from what they get accustomed to can take some time, and you may see some increased symptoms until they get settled into a new routine. I've seen this with obvious transitions like going to a new building, starting with a new teacher, getting a new schedule, also things like returning from long breaks, Christmas and summer, but also not so obvious. I've seen it with things like when students struggle more at the beginning of the week compared to the end of the week. Maybe they, start out with a lot of emotions and struggle to get into the routine from their weekend, but then by the end of the week, they tend to do better. So what does that mean for teachers? I think some of the ways we can support them are giving them more reminders about the schedule, more reminders about your expectations for them, and also just increased reassurance. Reassuring them that things are going to be okay and that you're going to help them get on track. And for teachers, just having that awareness ahead of time can help you be more proactive and think ahead about those students that might need that extra help to be more successful. So what does anxiety look like? We broke this down into two sections. This section primarily focuses on students in a K through 5 setting. Younger children are going to struggle more with verbalizing their symptoms and what they're feeling. And because anxiety often manifests with physical symptoms, it can be tricky. I definitely think it's important when you're seeing this on a regular basis with your students to get in contact with the parents, getting that background information, finding out what they notice and what happens at home compared to what happens at school, talking with them about what they see triggers their child is definitely important, and it's going to give you that baseline. And the more on the same page you guys are, the better. The more you guys can communicate with the kid in the same way and have the same expectations with them, you're going to be more successful. As far as the physical symptoms, I think about them in a couple different categories. I think about physical symptoms that are more related to tension. When you're anxious, you're tense. So this is going to come out in things like headaches, clenched fists. They might be more edgy or jumpy than normal. Tension can affect the way you concentrate and focus in class. So students are going to have trouble focusing for long periods of time. When I work with kids, they often describe it to me like their mind is racing from one thought to the next. It's not always rational thoughts or thoughts that make sense to you and me, but for them, it's just one thought after the next after the next. So you can imagine how exhausting and draining that can be because they feel like they can't control it. The other set of symptoms I would put in the category of panicky type symptoms. So when we feel out of control and our thoughts are racing, the other thing it can do to our bodies is more panicky type symptoms. So these would be things like being sick to their stomach, feeling like they're going to throw up, cramping. They have difficulty calming their breath, so they're taking really short breaths. Sweating and things like that. Some other things you might notice with younger children is their inability to sit still. Maybe they rock, they tap their feet, they shake their leg. They might also fidget a lot with pencils or things on their desk. And I found that this is just their way of trying to get that energy out. They have all these thoughts going on, they have all these feelings happening, and it's just a way to get it out of their body. So you're going to see those types of things a lot. And then next we will talk about some differences we see in older children. As we look at middle school and high school children, you're going to see a lot of similar symptoms. The advantage here is that they are usually able to identify what they are feeling and why a lot better than younger children. The physical symptoms we talked about on the last slide, like headaches, nausea, difficulty breathing, cramping, rapid heart rate, those things are still going to be here. We did have some additions that tend to be a little bit more related to just their biological and hormonal growth. We sometimes see this age group struggle more with sleep. Maybe they're getting too much or too little. They might have increased joint and muscle pain and overall just fatigue. They have a lot of added expectations and responsibilities at this age group, along with just increased extracurricular activities, and that can all naturally lead to some of the stuff we're talking about, but maybe more so with our anxious students. We also have an addition here of self-harm. Sometimes we see students who will scratch at their skin or pick at their skin, and this can be for a couple different reasons. On the last slide, we talked about that inability to concentrate and focus. They have all those thoughts running around and all that tension, and this self-harm can be a way to get that out. So we do see that from time to time. With this age group comes many increased responsibilities and expectations in your classes. You're probably more likely to start having more testing, higher expectations for how they act in your classroom, and just overall increased independence. And this can be hard for our anxious students to manage. They may try to avoid these things or make excuses to avoid the stress. They're also going to have an increase in social media use and just social situations with their peers, which can increase anxiety as their self-esteem starts to develop and become a major part of their lives. Next, we're going to look at some ideas for your classroom and ways to provide a more supportive classroom environment. We again have divided the next section into two sections. We're going to start with some ideas for younger students, and then follow-up slides will be for middle school and high school students. First and foremost, we think it's important to set the tone in your classroom as a place where emotions can be openly discussed. Helping your young students learn how to verbalize what they're feeling and then tools to manage those feelings are important. We've added some excellent books at the end of the presentation that you can use with your class as a whole. When I'm working on one-on-one with a student, we'll use books like this, we'll read it together, we'll process it and talk about it afterwards, and we've had some really excellent discussions about what that is like for them, if they've experienced anything similar, and it's just a really good way to get young students talking. You can read those with your class as a whole, and then, like I said, it can not only spark discussion, but it can spark follow-up activities that you do with your class to keep that kind of momentum going. Another strategy is adding movement. More recent studies have shown us that exercise and movement are a healthy way to manage anxiety. That added oxygen and blood flow can allow us to think more clearly and rationally, and it's just a really good distraction for anxious brains. There are tons of YouTube videos and resources to look for and find a good fit for your classroom setup. These can be especially helpful, after the students have needed to be focused for long periods of time, or if you just see a general lack of interest and energy in your room. It can sort of bring that energy back as well as the focus. Another strategy often used for anxiety is deep breathing. Helping students to learn to regulate their bodies and emotions is key. They are developing physically, we know, but they're also developing emotionally. Another strategy is to be mindful of transitions and how your students might deal with them differently. As we talked about before, anxious students have more difficulty when their routine is changed or the schedule is different. When they really don't know what to expect, it can cause their anxious brains to kind of go into overdrive. And this can lead down to all different scenarios that they think might happen. You can help your student by communicating more with them and their parents when the schedule is going to be different, just so they can kind of talk through and prepare the changes that will be happening. Also thinking about sort of day-to-day, sometimes students who are anxious, they do better when you can prepare them and give them warnings in between changing classes, or if you're doing something other than the normal. Lastly, there's been some success with creating a calm space. Of course, this has to be dependent on your room setup and size, but if possible, delegating a corner of your room can be beneficial when you start to see a student getting overwhelmed. You can be creative with how your space looks, but generally having some deep breathing reminders, distraction tools, and calming activities in the space is good. This is encouraged to be a safe space to help them self-regulate, but not to avoid work. We don't want them to spend all day over in this corner. It's really just meant to be a break, a timeout for them to do the things and use the coping skills they need to get back to work. Once they calm down, they can return to work as normal. When thinking about middle school and high school students, it's still important to educate them about anxiety and its symptoms. As I mentioned before, there's a push for increased independence and higher expectations at this age, and there should be. But you still want them to feel like this is a safe space and that they can come to you if needed. Going over with them things like in their classroom, if you're feeling anxious, this is what you can do. Giving them some ideas of how they can manage their anxiety in their classroom, or what they should do if they are feeling overwhelmed. And then secondly, just how to ask you for help. What's the best and most appropriate way to go about that? And if they do need some assistance or need to talk to you about some anxiety they're feeling, what's the best way to do that? Don't feel like that's something that should just be presumed. I think it helps students feel in control and know that, okay, this is a teacher who will listen and who will be there if I'm struggling. Just as with the younger students, practicing deep breathing continues to be essential. Hopefully this was a priority in their elementary classrooms, and you're just kind of continuing that. Making sure they understand the overall benefits to their nervous system and their thought processes. You want to make this a part of your routine. Repetition is really key to them understanding the benefits. Next, it's important that you are mindful of anxiety-provoking assignments. Of course, we still want you to push the students, as the skills they get from taking tests and presentations are important, but just be prepared that anxious students will struggle. Think about different ways you could accommodate or offer options for different assignments. And if that's not possible, work with the class ahead of time on how to handle worries and fears. We still like to think about transitions with this age group. At this point, they are probably balancing at least 6 to 7 classes a day, multiple transitions to their rooms, lockers, lunch, restroom. This can be pretty overwhelming and really difficult for anxious kids to manage. Thinking about what they need from class to class, where they need to be, when they need to be there. And then on top of that, there's just a lot of social things that happen that can be stressful. If you see an anxious student struggling with this, meet with them one-on-one and help them identify where the problems are. I think students are much more beneficial talking to teachers in the building about these types of problems compared to parents, for example. Parents are only going to be able to know so much about logistics, about where they can and can't go, about hallways, about how to manage different things academically. A teacher is going to know what they can and can't do and can help them process and figure out a plan going forward to be more successful. Lastly, self-esteem becomes a big part of any adolescent's life, and generally at this age they really start developing a sense of self. And with that sense of self can come a lot of negative self-talk. Anxious teenagers can develop these all-or-nothing thinking patterns, which are really unhealthy. When you notice them verbalizing it out loud, redirect them and help them change their statements into something more rational and positive. You can bet that if they're saying it out loud, they're saying it to themselves inside their head 1,000 more times. So helping them to reframe that and be more rational with their thinking is important. Last slide has some resources. These are all great tools that can benefit you in your classroom. I hope you take a look at some of them and have learned some ways to better support our students managing anxiety. Thank you.